Fast and Furious 10, otherwise known as Fast X.
The Alpha Critic.
Punch it!
Hey, dorks, what are we blowing up?
What? The Vatican? Wow, you guys are going to hell.
This movie was stellar. The new Fast and Furious movie was part 1 of 2. That is, it ends with a cliffhanger, and, some people might see that as a problem. I don't. I'm very happy to look forward to the next installment in this franchise because, honestly, it's worth the wait. There are few, if any, film franchises as entertaining as the Fast and Furious franchise. When I left the theater, the folks that I went to see the film with, they all said the same thing. They said it was super entertaining, but also it was super stupid. And I cannot tell you how much I disagree with this statement. There is nothing stupid about this movie. I mean, it doesn't make you think. It doesn't ask any difficult philosophical questions. It doesn't pose any complicated ethical dilemmas. But that's not what you want from a Fast and Furious film. When the original Fast and Furious film came out, I skipped it. It seemed like a mindless action film. I perceived it based on the marketing with the same word everybody used walking out of this latest installment. Stupid. I thought it was stupid. But after a few years passed, I had a conversation with a friend of mine whose taste in films I somewhat respected. And this particular franchise was mentioned. We brought it up. We talked about it. I said I'd never watched it. And I'd never watched it because I always thought it was stupid. And he responded, you should watch that film. I think you might be surprised. So, still skeptical, I reluctantly watched the first film. And to my shock, it was actually a good film. And I subsequently watched every other Fast and Furious film, well, at least every one that had been made up until that point. And of course, some of the films are better than others. And at some point, it became a little bit less about the story and more about the action. And at some point, the filmmakers just decided to completely do away with the laws of physics. But they still made it work. It was still entertaining, and they were still a lot of fun to watch. I mean, look, at this point, Dominic Toretto is essentially a superhero in a cinematic universe that pretends to be realistic. But again, that's okay. That's what Fast and Furious is. And if you go to the films expecting that, well, then you're going to have a great time. It's like jumping on a roller coaster. If you expect that experience to be like reading Tolstoy, well, then you're probably going to get off the ride saying, what the heck was that? You probably won't have that much fun, right? That wasn't like reading Tolstoy at all. But if you know what a roller coaster is, and you get on expecting the ride that you will inevitably get, it's fantastic. Of course, this new film was a spectacle. There were all the typical stunts, chases, explosions, and special effect moments that you would want from a Fast and Furious film. But there was also just the right amount of humor and just the right amount of heart. The Fast and Furious films have figured out a formula, and many people might argue that films made with a copy-paste template are not as creative, original, or as admirable as a more original idea. And yeah, of course that's true. However, the formula that the Fast and Furious folks have developed works, and it works really, really well. Even if one aspect of the film falls short, they have consistently got the ratios right. What do I mean by the ratios? Well, sort of like cooking a good dish. You don't want it to be too salty or spicy or sweet. You don't want it too concentrated or too weak. You want the texture to be just right. And for it all to work out well, you need the right ratios of ingredients. In the Fast and Furious films, well, they add just the right amount of story, action, comedy, and heart. And they always deliver those ratios in just the right proportions. And this new film is no different. This is everything you expect in a Fast and Furious film. And as I said, it is stellar. And so this is why I don't think this film is stupid. Despite the fact that it doesn't make you think, right? It's not like a real thinking film. It does take a lot of brains to get those ratios just right. It takes a keen sense of what an audience wants to see to consistently create new and exciting action sequences. Sure, jumping from one car to the next will always seem harrowing and dangerous, but you have to care about the character who's jumping from one car to the next car in order to find yourself on the edge of your seat, biting your nails, hoping desperately that the character survives. And these movies do that really well. The stories, although not deeply philosophical explorations of the human condition, are nevertheless reflections on the values of most people around the world. There's laughter and sadness, anger and jubilation, and then there's the fantastical stunts that's thrown in to make it all exciting and fun. And I can see how some people might consider these films to be soulless and view them merely as mindless fun. But there's one thing that keeps them from feeling soulless: Vin Diesel. This guy clearly loves this film franchise, and he clearly loves his character. And every time he does one of these films, he plays the character of Dom, and as if he truly loves his team, which he also calls his family.
I've seen all of the Fast and the Furious movies, lady. It's all about
Family!
The word family kind of becomes a joke in these movies, as these characters say it so much, especially Dom. But this was the message of the first Fast and Furious film, and it does provide the film with a kind of moral core and keeps it grounded in traditional values, which is something that's sorely lacking in American cinema today. So even though the word itself has become overused in these films, it really is the theme of these stories, and I think it's a necessary element to include. And again, because Vin Diesel really sells it, because we believe that Dom truly cares for his family, both his biological family and his chosen family, we, the audience, we care about everybody in these films too. And that moral core, that is part of a broader trend with these films, and it's especially notable in this latest entry. Put simply, Fast and Furious 10 is not woke, but it's beyond not woke. It's, dare I say it, conservative. Now, these films are all aggressively multicultural, so I think it's easy to think that they're woke films, but they're not. And Fast and Furious 10 in particular is a conservative film. Personally, I always get annoyed when filmmakers cram multiculturalism into a project. The new Cleopatra documentary on Netflix and the new Little Mermaid film, these are perfect examples of this. But the reason I find this annoying, typically, is because of the reason they're doing it. At least the reason that it seems like they're doing it. It seems like they do this simply to promote a woke agenda. They're not hiring the best actors for the job. In the Fast and Furious franchise, the actors chosen for a given part always seem to perfectly fit into the world of Fast and Furious. They're not casting for a diversity point or to virtue signal or to make evil white people who might watch the movie less bigoted. They're just casting because the actors are right for the parts. And that, to me, is a necessary part of great filmmaking. And so although multiculturalism in cinema has become a bit of a red flag for a lot of us, in the case of the Fast and Furious films, it's actually just a natural part of that world, and it's really not an indication of wokeness whatsoever. In reality, a lot of Black Americans, Latinos, Asians, and Muslims here in the U.S. are, in fact, culturally conservative. But, because of the Republicans are bigots narrative that's constantly being perpetuated by the left-wing media, a lot of people are misled about what political party they should be a part of. But consider the nature of these characters, especially Dom. They all respect traditional old-fashioned values, God, and family. That's the first most obvious thing. But when you look closer, you see hints that the writer is doing more than just playing to a conservative audience. Ever since the January 6th protests, many Trump supporters have been arrested by the FBI. This has been viewed by conservatives as a betrayal of the values of the FBI. Most conservatives do not perceive the January 6th protest as a violent insurrection, as it is always reported on CNN and MSNBC. But rather, conservatives view January 6th as a genuinely peaceful protest conducted by patriotic Americans with a valid grievance against the federal government. But by hunting down and arresting these honorable Americans, the FBI has turned its back on its own values. Furthermore, conservative reporters, especially on social media, have been reporting about the corruption involved in Operation Crossfire Hurricane, the so-called counterintelligence operation conducted by the FBI, which it has now been confirmed by the Durham investigation, was clearly an excuse to spy on the Trump campaign and a conspiracy between the FBI and the Hillary Clinton campaign to sabotage Trump and install Hillary Clinton as president. And of course, all of this undermines the democratic voting process in America. It is essentially what I would call treason. And one major plot element in this film, Fast and Furious 10, is the FBI turning against Dominic Toretto and his team. And this is explained as the FBI turning its back on its own values, exactly paralleling what's happening in real life with the FBI today. And this is not something that leftists believe, but it is something that conservatives believe. And so I do think that this aspect of the film was written in as a reference to what's going on with the FBI today. Maybe that's wrong, but it seems like a very strong coincidence. Another indication that this film is conservative is the effete, somewhat gay nature of the villain. Now, Jason Momoa's acting was phenomenal in this film, but we'll get to that in a moment. First, I want to discuss the nature of his character Dante Reyes. Dante Reyes is the son of Hernan Reyes, who was the villain in Fast 5. So Hernan's son wants revenge for the death of his father, and he's back in this new film to kill Dom and everyone else who is peripherally involved in his father's death. But Dante is not a normal man out for revenge. He's clearly lost his mind. Whether it was a brain injury from his initial encounter with Dom or just the psychological trauma of losing his father, Dante has now become a deranged maniac. He's reminiscent of Heath Ledger's Joker, but with a twisted femininity that almost makes him more creepy. He wears a lot of jewelry and satin, and he paints his nails. He's not quite transgender, but there are hints of that. Maybe he identifies as gender non-binary or something along those lines. In any case, this hints at the current culture war in America, and creating such a villain for the film aligns perfectly with the views of many conservatives, because conservatives don't accept that every gay person is born this way, as the left likes to claim. We tend to think that some, if not most, gay people, trans people, gender fluid people, non-binary, whatever, all those different things, we tend to believe that most of those people are not born that way at all, but rather suffer from some kind of mental illness. And so if you make a film where the villain is suffering from a mental illness because of some kind of a great trauma, as is the case in this film, it would actually make a lot of sense that he might be gay or trans or in some other way LGBTQIA+, ! Whatever it is. Now, contrast this character with Dom's consistent wearing of his Christian cross, and it becomes quite clear this is a conservative film. This is the traditional Christian man against the gender non-conformist leftist. This is a conservative film. Now, before I switch topics, let me just give a quick nod to Jason Momoa's performance in this film. Jason Momoa was awesome. Frankly, he stole the show. Now, that's not to take anything away from Vin Diesel. He's always the charming, badass backbone of every Fast and Furious film. Without Dominic Toretto, we would not care about anything else that happens in these movies. And Vin Diesel delivers the charm and heart and action and comedy flawlessly. And there's nothing here that I could possibly criticize with Vin Diesel. But despite of how awesome Vin Diesel is, we already expect that. By being the charming, badass backbone of these films, Vin Diesel has kind of put himself in the unenviable position of being too good. I don't expect to ever see him not delivering, but when he does deliver, unfortunately, I don't think anybody notices. Because after having done so well in so many films, Vin Diesel being awesome has become normal. Jason Momoa, on the other hand, that was a real surprise. We all know that Jason Momoa is a good actor. We all know that he looks like a badass, and we all know that he's charming and can deliver a joke. But I don't think anyone expected what we got in this movie. Jason Momoa is fantastic. I honestly think that this is the best villain in any Fast and Furious film. And look, I don't know whose idea it was to make Jason Momoa's character this effete psychopath, but this was brilliant. And as I said before, he's got the maniacal lunacy of the Joker, but with an effete playfulness that makes him singularly creepy. And you kind of believe that this kind of psychopath could be capable of inflicting all of this suffering on these people. But the reason it's so great, I think, is because it's unexpected from Jason Momoa. This is a guy that we've seen in loads of films at this point, but we've never seen him like this. Now, before I go, I do want to address two major flaws in this film, just so they don't come as a shock to anybody when you see the film. Brie Larson and Pete Davidson. Why? Why put these two in the film? Pete Davidson just has one scene, but it's one scene too much. The guy can't act. He's not funny. Why is he even in this film? I can't imagine that he has any actual fans in the world. Everybody looks at him as some kind of curiosity, like they used to look at the genetic misfits at freak shows. And the scene that he's in is totally unnecessary. They've clearly written it into the film just for him. Thankfully, it appears to be a one and done. He certainly wasn't set up to be a recurring character in any further installments. But Brie Larson, well, her part is actually rather significant. She plays the daughter of Kurt Russell's character from the previous films, and she appears to essentially be his replacement in this one. But Kurt Russell is awesome, and Brie Larson is annoying. And I will say that the character was okay. I didn't see anything particularly annoying about the character. But Brie Larson, she's just left a bitter impression with many movie fans over the years, especially since she was cast as Captain Marvel and was incredibly smug and defensive about it, and essentially accused fans that didn't like her of being sexist. There's really no reason for anyone to ever hire that woman ever again, unless you're a feminist who really hates men. There's no reason to cast her. Ever. And she's not charismatic or particularly beautiful or interesting or really anything that might justify casting her. I don't get why she is so beloved by Hollywood. She's certainly not beloved by the viewing audience. But let's end this video on a high note. I said that Jason Momoa stole the show, but there was really two actors that stole the show. Momoa, yes, but also Mr. John Cena.
And his name is John Cena!
This guy is absolutely fantastic. He really proved himself as a true star in the show Peacemaker. But in this film, he brings all the badassery and comedy necessary for a Fast and Furious film epitomized in just one character. He spends the majority of his screen time with Dom's son, protecting him from the bad guys, but as he's with this kid, his nephew, he's got to make the kid laugh and feel safe, and so he plays the fun, funny uncle character for a lot of the film. And although he still kicks ass a lot, right, he's also top-level charming, and a lot of the most fun, funny moments came from John Cena in this movie.
And his name is John Cena!
At the end of the day, you do not watch a Fast and Furious movie to feel like an intellectual. You watch it to have a good time. It's a roller coaster. It's not Tolstoy. But if you know that going in, well, it is just about the best roller coaster the cinema has to offer. Well, that's it for me, and remember, it's all about
Family! Family!
good night.